Once again, welcome to the South Sudan National Participation Institute. And in our today's presentation, we are going to talk about trauma. And during the presentation, I'm going to give some experiences, at least one experience about trauma. And the purpose of this presentation is not to recall or maybe encourage individuals to recall traumatic experiences. But the purpose is, after knowing that the person had actually gone through these experiences, what would you do to overcome these traumatic experiences? And let's face it, as individuals and as we continue to live in this life, we may have actually gone through traumatic experiences, or had seen people who had gone through some of these traumatic experiences. And especially people who come from war-torn countries, or people who come from countries that had been faced with natural disasters such as volcanoes, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, and so on. So they may have gone through traumatic experiences or had known people who had gone through these traumatic experiences. So after knowing or acknowledging that a person or an individual had actually gone through a traumatic experience, then the main reason now is how to overcome these experiences. And by the way, traumas can actually leave, temporary effects on individuals, or it can leave permanent or lasting effects that may actually take a long period of time to heal or to overcome. So that's why it is important to be aware that sometimes we might have gone through a traumatic experience, or as we continue to live, we may come across one. So now, to start our presentation, we're just going to give a brief definition about a trauma. What is a trauma? A trauma is defined as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. And that experience can cause physical injury, or it can cause an emotional or psychological damage. That is just in a brief the definition of a trauma. And after knowing this brief definition, we are going to move to the types of traumas. There are so many types of traumas, but the ones that are commonly known are three. And one of the first of these three types of traumas is the psychological trauma. And the psychological trauma is actually individuals' inability to cope with a difficult situation. And then the second type of trauma is the emotional trauma. And the emotional trauma is defined as a shattered sense of security that makes an individual or group of individuals or people in the community feel helpless in a dangerous world. And this is exactly how some people who are going through traumatic experiences feel like. And then the third type of trauma is the physical trauma. And this one is the one that is commonly known because it leaves physical effects on the individual or a group of individuals, or a group of people in the community for that matter. And especially in countries that had been ravaged in conflict, like I mentioned earlier, or people who come from countries that have gone through natural disasters, you can see some of these physical effects. And the physical trauma is defined as a serious injury to the body. So this is in brief the three types of traumas. And after knowing these types of traumas, we're going to move to the causes of traumas. There are so many causes of traumas. Some of them are natural causes, such as earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, and so on. And some of them can be man-made. For example, a serious injury that has been inflicted on an individual or group of individuals, a severe illness, a death that the person had witnessed, acts of violence, war, torture, or military conflicts, and so on. So these are some of the causes of traumatic experiences. And there may be more, but these are the obvious ones. And then after knowing the causes of trauma, then we move to the symptoms of trauma. And one of the obvious symptoms of a traumatic experience is sadness. Of course, if a person, for example, lost some of their family members in a plane crash or a train crash or a natural disaster or in a conflict, of course, those individuals become sad. And another thing is the emotional outbursts. People who are going through traumatic experiences or who had gone through traumatic experiences, they can't control themselves. They can't control their emotions. And there is fatigue also, poor concentration, anxiety, inability to cope in certain situations. And this can cause psychological traumas, and this can go as far as causing depression. So these are some of the symptoms, the obvious symptoms of traumatic experiences that can be seen. Now, after knowing these symptoms, what are the effects of trauma, the visible effects? And like was mentioned earlier, some of these visible effects are violence. Whether this is a community violence or it is a senseless war or conflict, depression, lawlessness, and as we can see also in the news, things like domestic violence can be some of the effects of traumatic experiences. So, and there may be more of these kinds of effects, but these are the obvious ones that people experience actually in life. And as I had mentioned sometime in this presentation or earlier, that I'm going to recount some experiences about trauma. Back in 2013, I had been invited to one of the universities here to give some experiences, at least personal experiences about traumas that I might have experienced, especially a person who is coming from a war-torn country like South Sudan. And in that presentation, actually, there are some of these Holocaust survivors. The Holocaust that happened in Germany in the Second World War during the Nazis regime in Germany. A lot of Jewish people, actually millions of them were killed in a brutal way. And in that presentation, actually, it was the commemoration of the Holocaust, more than 50 years after the Holocaust had happened in Germany. So I was invited to talk about my personal experiences about the conflict in South Sudan. And during the presentation, of course, like I mentioned, these Holocaust survivors from Germany. And as they recounted their experiences, some of these experiences happened when they were really very young, but they're now in their, say, mid-70s, or late 70s, early 80s. But even though they have come this long, but still, they actually face some of these traumatic experiences, and they were able to recall them, And then during my presentation, I come to know that I have actually gone through some of these traumatic experiences. Because when I was back in South Sudan during the war, the conflict between the South and the North, people were sieged in a city. There was a bombardment, and when you travel, I had traveled through convoys, and the convoys had been attacked. You had seen people, losing their lives, in a massive way. And, I come to know that I had actually gone through traumatic experiences. And that's why sometimes you may go through these experiences, but we don't know it. But after listening to the stories of these people who had survived in that horrible situation, then I come to know that I was actually experiencing some kind of trauma when I was back home in South Sudan. And you can even imagine how the people in the current conflict that is ravaging our beloved country is going through, or they are going through. So, and in the end of 2013, actually, one of the highest ranking officials in the Parliament of South Sudan came to visit us in the city in which we live. And, talking about our experience, and especially in that presentation, I was able to relate to him that, sometimes people, especially us who come from war-torn countries, we may be going through some of these traumatic experiences, but without knowing it. And he actually said, like in South Sudan, people had been going and still continue to go through these traumatic experiences. And sometimes that is why there is this vicious cycle of violence and counter-violence and so on. And that's why it is important to realize that, people may be going through these traumatic experiences. And after knowing this, then we need to know also how to overcome these traumatic experiences. And back to our presentation, we are going to talk about how can we actually recover from these traumatic experiences after knowing that we had actually gone through or may go through some of this. And some of the things that you can do is actually to get moving on in life, because in life we are usually faced with so many difficulties. But some of these difficulties should not bog people down. People should be able to overcome, some of these traumatic experiences that people have gone through may be so difficult to overcome. But in life, we have to learn how to move forward, because without moving forward, we will feel really helpless and feel depressed. So one of the ways is to move on. Another thing is to associate with people, other people who have gone through this, and try to share your experiences in a positive way. In this way, you will be able to find some solace and find some ways of how to move on. Other things that can be done also is taking care of yourself. Sometimes when people are going through fatigue or through traumatic experiences, they don't take good care of themselves. So taking care of oneself is one of the most important things you can do for yourself and for others also who are going through the same things, through the same traumatic experiences. Other things that can be done is participating in positive activities like social clubs, sports activities, and getting enough sleep and so on. And in extreme cases, actually, a person may need some psychological, emotional counseling, or even physical therapy. So there may be so many other ways of how to recover from traumatic experiences, but I think these are some of the obvious ones. And in mass conflicts, like what is happening now in South Sudan, this may need actually a national kind of healing to help the people overcome the traumatic experiences that they're going through Maybe it may need a national reconciliation to help people how to overcome from these traumatic experiences and how to rebuild trust among people who had been living in constant conflict, or people who had gone through shattered lives, or they may have lost some of their beloved ones. So I hope this presentation will help us realize that sometimes we may be going through traumatic experiences but without knowing it. But the most important thing is, after knowing it, as an individual or as a group of individuals or as a community or as a society or as a country, what would you do to overcome these traumatic experiences? And it is important that people realize that and try to overcome these traumatic experiences, because in this way we can be able to end this vicious cycle of violence and counter-violence. So I hope this presentation would help individuals, communities, and societies, and even countries in situations like our current situation in South Sudan, and people who may be going through natural disasters. And this will help them realize that, yes, in life people may be going through traumatic experiences, but usually people have to find ways how to overcome these experiences, how to find healing, and how to find the way forward in life. So thank you. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation. And until we meet again in future presentations, I just want to wish you a healthy life and a safe life and a secure life. Once again, thank you very much.